Have you ever heard a story so strange, so impossible, that it sounds like it was pulled straight from the deepest corners of the galaxy? Imagine an alien woman, living her life as nothing more than a servant unseen, unheard, and forgotten. Then against every law of her world, a human enters her life. Not only does he notice her, he risks everything to raise her higher than anyone ever believed possible. From servant to queen, this is a tale of forbidden love, rebellion, and destiny that will leave you questioning what it truly means to be human. Far beyond the reach of Earth's telescopes, hidden in a dark corner of the galaxy, there was a planet known only to a few explorers. It was a world of dazzling skies, shimmering purple oceans, and golden sands that stretched for miles. But behind this beauty lay a cruel truth. The planet was ruled by an ancient alien race, the Xeralians, who adhered to a strict hierarchy of power. At the very bottom of their society lived the servant aliens with no rights, no freedom, and no voice. Among these forgotten souls was a young alien woman named Leora. Her skin glowed faintly like moonlight, and her large silver eyes reflected a sadness she could never put into words. Leora had been born into servitude. From the moment she opened her eyes as a child, she was told that her purpose was to obey. Her tasks were endless carrying water, cleaning crystal halls, and tending to the needs of her masters. She was invisible in her own world, treated as nothing more than a shadow. Every night, when her work was done, Leora would sit by the cliffs overlooking the violet sea. She dreamed of freedom, though she didn't even know what freedom truly meant. The stars above seemed to whisper promises of something more, something beyond the cruel cycle of servitude. But she could only sigh because dreams for someone like her were dangerous. The masters punished those who dared to hope. It was on one of those nights, as the twin moons rose high, that something happened, something that would change not only Leora's fate, but the fate of her entire world. A human ship descended from the stars. To the Xeralians, humans were intruders, often dismissed as weak creatures unworthy of respect. But to Leora, the sight of the ship was like seeing destiny take shape. She didn't know why, but her heart raced, as if the universe had been waiting for this moment all along. From the ship stepped a man, Captain Elias Ward, an explorer from Earth. Unlike the masters of her world, his eyes did not hold cruelty. Instead, they carried curiosity, courage, and something Leora had never seen before: kindness. He was on a mission to negotiate trade with the Xyrelian rulers, but fate had other plans for him. For the first time in her life, Leora felt noticed. Their eyes met, and though no words were spoken, something sparked a connection across species, across worlds, across everything that should have kept them apart. But in Xyrelis, such a connection was forbidden. A servant could never rise above her station. A human could never claim a place in their hierarchy. And yet, in that fleeting moment, both Leora and Elias knew something had begun, something dangerous. Something beautiful, and something that could shatter the order of the universe itself. The day after the human ship landed, the rulers of Xyrelis hosted a grand reception. The crystal palace glowed with colors that shimmered like fire trapped in ice. Every noble alien wore robes stitched with starlight threads, jewels that pulsed like tiny suns, and crowns shaped from meteor stones. To them, this gathering was not about friendship. It was about showing off their power. Leora, as always, was present but unseen. She crept among the guests, carrying trays of glowing drinks and plates filled with fruits that floated just above the platters. Her head was bowed, her steps silent. She was trained never to make eye contact with the masters. But this time she couldn't help herself. Across the shining hall stood Captain Elias Ward, the human who had arrived from Earth. Elias looked out of place in the hall of glittering rulers. He wore the uniform of Earth space explorers, simple compared to the jewels around him. Yet there was something about him that made him stand tall among the alien lords. And his eyes scanned the room, not with arrogance, but with awareness, as if he saw things others ignored. When his gaze landed on Leora, it lingered. For a heartbeat, she froze, the tray shaking in her hands. Then, against every rule drilled into her since birth, she looked back. In that instant, the noise of the hall seemed to fade. The whispers, the laughter, the music hit, all vanished into silence. For the first time, someone was not seeing Leora as a servant. Elias's eyes held no command, no demand. Instead, they carried a question, as though he was asking, "Who are you really?" Leora quickly lowered her gaze. If any ruler noticed her hesitation, the punishment would be swift and brutal, but her heart raced. She had been invisible her whole life, and now, in the middle of a palace filled with lords and queens, a human stranger had broken through the walls of her silence. Later that night, fate brought them together again. Leora was ordered to guide Elias through the palace gardens after the feast. The rulers saw it as nothing, just a servant escorting a guest. But for Leora, it was terrifying. Every step she took beside him felt like walking a dangerous line. "Do you have a name?" Elias asked softly as they walked under glowing trees, whose leaves shimmered like emerald fire. Leora hesitated. Speaking to a guest without permission was forbidden. But something inside her whispered that this was a moment she couldn't let pass. "Leora," she whispered. Elias smiled. "Leora," he repeated, as if the name itself was sacred. "That's beautiful." No one had ever spoken her name like that before. To her masters, she was nothing more than a servant. But this human spoke her name as though it belonged to a queen. In that moment, something impossible began to bloom, a bond neither of them could deny. What neither of them knew was that eyes were already watching from the shadows. And in Xyrillus, forbidden bonds came at a terrible cost. The palace garden was quiet, except for the soft hum of glowing flowers that bloomed in the night. Their petals released sparks of light drifting into the air like fireflies. Leora had walked through these gardens hundreds of times, but never like this. For the first time, she was not alone in her silence. The human walked beside her, speaking words that seemed to break through the heavy chains of her world. Captain Elias Ward was different from the rulers she served. Where they barked commands, he asked questions. Where they treated her like dust beneath their feet, he looked at her as though she mattered. Each word he spoke made her heart pound harder, not with fear, but with something she had never felt before: hope. "Leora," Elias said, pausing by a fountain where silver water spiraled upward against gravity. "Why do you look so sad? This place is beautiful." Her breath caught. She had never been asked how she felt. No one cared about a servant's sadness. For a moment, she considered lying. But his eyes were steady, patient, as though he could wait forever for the truth. "This place is beautiful," she said softly, "but it is not mine. Nothing here belongs to me, not even my life." Elias frowned. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, glancing around to be sure no one was listening. Then, with her voice barely louder than the hum of the flowers, she whispered, "We are servants. Born to serve, live to serve, and die as shadows. We have no freedom, no choice. To dream is dangerous. To hope is forbidden." The words spilled from her like a dam had broken. She had held them inside for years, afraid to even think them too loudly. Yet now, here she was, telling a human stranger her deepest truth. Elias's face darkened, not with anger at her, but with fury at the injustice. "That's not life," he said firmly. "That's slavery." The word struck her like a thunderclap. No one on Xyrillus would dare call it that. To them it was simply the order of things. But Elias had named it for what it was. In that moment, Leora realized that her suffering wasn't natural. It wasn't fate. It was a prison built by those in power, unseen in the shadows. Another servant named Kale overheard their conversation. Kale was older, his back bent from years of labor. He had always kept his head down, never daring to defy the masters. But hearing Leora speak so boldly, hearing the humans call their chains slavery, sparked something inside him. For the first time in decades, Kale felt a flicker of rebellion. The whispers began that very night. Among the servants, stories spread of the human who had looked into the eyes of a servant girl and called her free. Some dismissed it as foolish talk. Others feared it would bring punishment. But deep down, many felt the stirrings of something powerful. For Leora, it was terrifying and thrilling at once. She knew her life was in danger if anyone discovered the bond forming between her and Elias. Yet she could not ignore the fire burning in her chest. For the first time, she didn't just dream of freedom, she began to believe it might be possible. And that belief was more dangerous than any weapon. The days that followed were unlike anything Leora had ever known. She still carried trays, scrubbed marble floors, polished crystal walls, but her heart no longer felt chained in silence. Every time she passed through the palace halls, she felt Ilias's presence. Sometimes it was only a glance across the room, other times a brief moment where his voice brushed against her like a secret no one else could hear. But in Xerilus, even the smallest act of kindness could draw suspicion. The rulers noticed everything, and they despised anything that broke their order. To them, servants were invisible shadows, necessary for labor, but never worthy of attention. When Elias greeted Leora with a soft smile one morning in the dining hall, the ripple it caused was immediate. Whispers began among the nobles. Why does the human waste his gaze on a servant? Does he not understand her place? Leora felt the weight of those stares pressing into her skin like knives. She lowered her head, but it was too late. The spark had been seen. That night, the head overseer of servants, a cruel alien named Vorak, cornered her in the servant quarters. His tall frame blocked the doorway, his glowing eyes sharp with suspicion. "Shh, you will not look at the human again," he hissed, his voice cold as steel. "Do you understand, Shadow?" Leora trembled but said nothing. Silence was the only defense a servant had, yet inside her anger burned. She had done nothing but exist, and still she was punished for being noticed. Vorak leaned closer, his breath heavy. "If I see your eyes lift again, I will see to it that you are cast into the mines. You will beg for mercy until your bones are dust." The mines were a death sentence. The servants sent there never returned. Leora nodded, forcing herself to obey, though her fists clenched tight. When Elias learned of this the next day, his fury was barely contained. He had heard whispers from Kale, the older servant, about what had happened. "They threatened her for nothing," Elias muttered, pacing the chamber he had been given. His jaw tightened. "All because she dared to exist in front of me." Kale placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. "Careful, human. The masters watch everything. If they sense rebellion, they will crush it before it breathes." But Elias's resolve only grew.
How?
"Then let them watch," he said. "I won't stand by and let them treat her like this." That night, under the cover of starlight, Elias found Leora again. They met in the hidden corners of the garden, where the glowing flowers shielded them from prying eyes. Leora's heart pounded as she confessed her fear. "If they see us together, they will kill me," she whispered. Elias reached for her hand. His warmth was steady, his grip firm. "Then we'll make sure they don't. I didn't come here to bow to tyrants. I came here to explore new worlds, and maybe, just maybe, I came here to find you." The words lit a fire in her soul. She knew this bond could destroy them both, but in his eyes she saw something she had never known. A promise. What neither of them realized was that Vorak had already set spies to watch the garden. And soon, the quiet spark between servant and human would ignite into a blaze that could not be hidden. The palace of Xerilus was more than a home for rulers. It was a fortress built on fear. Every hallway echoed with whispers, and every shadow seemed alive with hidden eyes. For centuries, the nobles had ruled through control, ensuring that no servant dared to rise, no spark of rebellion dared to burn. But now, with a single human's arrival, the balance was beginning to tilt. Vorak, the overseer, had not forgotten his warning to Leora. His suspicion only deepened after spotting her vanish into the gardens at night. He was cruel but not foolish. He knew that forbidden connections could destroy the fragile chains that held the servant class in place. To him, the thought of a servant even speaking freely was a threat to the order he guarded with his life. So he ordered spy silent watchers, who hid among the vines, behind crystal columns, and in the twisting shadows of the palace walls. Leora and Elias never realized how close the danger was. In those stolen moments, their bond grew stronger. They spoke of Earth, of stars, of dreams she had never dared to imagine. Elias described oceans that stretched endlessly, skies that burned with golden sunsets, and cities filled with lights brighter than constellations. To Leora, his words were like windows into another world, one where she could exist as more than a shadow. But the spies listened carefully, memorizing every glance, every smile, every word. And soon, their reports reached Vorak. One night, Vorak stood before the council of nobles, his voice dripping with venom. "The human grows too close to one of our servants. His weakness threatens our order. If the shadows believe they can rise, rebellion will spread like fire." The nobles reacted with disgust. One sneered, "A servant?" The human lowers himself to a shadow. Another added, unacceptable. If the servants begin to think themselves equal, chaos will consume Zerulus. But not all nobles agreed. Among them was Lady Saranya, a ruler known for her cunning mind rather than cruelty. She spoke with a dangerous smile. Perhaps we should watch a little longer. If the human truly cares for the servant, we might use this attachment for our gain. Her words dripped with calculation. Unlike Vorak, she did not seek to crush the spark immediately. She wanted to twist it, control it, and bend it to the council's power. Meanwhile, Leora's world was changing. Servants had begun to whisper her name in secret corners. Kale spread the story of how a human had looked into her eyes and called her free. To many, she was still just a servant, but to others, she was becoming something more, a symbol of what could be. That terrified her as much as it inspired her. She knew what happened to symbols on Zerulus. They were destroyed before they could grow. One evening, as she sat with Elias by the violet sea, she asked him softly, "Do you understand what you've done? By seeing me, by speaking to me, you've lit a fire that cannot be hidden." Elias looked at her, his voice steady. "Then let it burn. Fires can destroy, but they can also bring light. Maybe it's time your world saw the truth." But the shadows were already watching, waiting. And soon, the fire would spread farther than either of them could control. Night fell heavy across Zerulus, wrapping the golden deserts and glowing oceans in deep violet shadows. Inside the palace, the nobles slept beneath ceilings carved from starlight crystal, their dreams filled with power and pride. But in the servant quarters, silence weighed like chains. Servants lay on cold stone floors, their breath shallow, their hopes buried deep. Yet in the middle of this suffocating darkness, Leora's heart pulsed with something new. Fear and fire clashed within her chest. She knew she was being watched. She felt the weight of unseen eyes in every corridor. But when Elias's voice whispered in her memory, calling her by name, speaking to her like she was more than nothing, hope kept her alive. Elias had not come to Zerulus's planning to break its chains. His mission was simple: open trade routes, strengthen Earth's position, and leave. But since meeting Leora, everything had changed. She wasn't just another alien in a strange world. She was proof that dignity and humanity could exist in the most hopeless corners of the galaxy. He couldn't turn away. One night, he found her again in the palace gardens. The flowers glowed softly, casting pale light across her silver skin. She looked more like a queen than a servant, though she still wore the plain gray robes of her station. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously to the trees. "If they see us, they won't," Elias interrupted gently, though he knew the risk. "Leora, I don't care about their rules. You're not a shadow to me. You never were." Her breath trembled. "To them, I am. If they think I've stepped out of line, they'll end me without hesitation." Elias stepped closer, his voice lowered, fierce but tender. "Then I'll protect you. If this world thinks you're a servant, then I'll remind it who you really are. Not just a shadow, not just a name, but someone worth fighting for." For a moment, silence fell between them. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, and slowly, Leora reached for his hand. Her fingers trembled as they touched his, but when their hands clasped, warmth spread through her like sunlight breaking through a storm. In that single touch, everything changed. They weren't just two strangers from different worlds anymore. They were bound by something stronger than fear. A secret bond, fragile yet unbreakable, had been formed. But bonds in Zerulus carried weight. Word of their closeness traveled faster than either of them imagined. Servants whispered with awe. Leora touched the human's hand. Nobles hissed with disgust. The human lowers himself with a shadow, and Vorak, always watching, clenched his teeth in rage. The council was divided. Some wanted Leora destroyed immediately to snuff out the spark. Others, like Lady Saranya, insisted on waiting, seeing how far this bond could stretch before breaking. "Sometimes," she purred, "a bond becomes a weapon when twisted the right way." Meanwhile, in the quiet of the gardens, Leora and Elias didn't speak of politics or power. They simply held hands beneath the glowing trees, two souls daring to believe in something forbidden. Neither of them knew how dangerous their bond had already become, more how quickly it would be tested. Because in the shadows, plans were already being made to tear them apart. The rulers of Xyrelis gathered in their council chamber, a vast circular hall carved from black stone that shimmered like glass. Pillars rose high above them, etched with glowing runes that pulsed as if alive. At the center of the chamber burned a blue fire, a symbol of the power they believed to be eternal. Around this fire, the nobles sat on thrones of crystal, their eyes sharp, their voices cold. Vorax stood before them, his tall frame tense with fury. His voice boomed across the chamber. The human grows too close to the shadow. I warned her, I threatened her, yet she defies the order of our world, and the human encourages her. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Some nobles muttered with disgust, while others leaned forward with curiosity. Lady Saranya, her long robes trailing like rivers of starlight, raised a slender brow. And what harm is there in a human's foolish gaze? Do you truly fear that one shadow could break centuries of rule? Vorax snarled. One spark is all it takes to start a fire. Already whispers spread among the servants. They speak of freedom. Of hope, this human must be silenced and the shadow destroyed before the infection spreads. A heavy silence followed. The council fire hissed as though alive, throwing sharp shadows across their faces. Then Lord Zyros, one of the oldest rulers, spoke in a voice like grinding stone. If we act too soon, the servants may revolt. Fear controls them now. But if we strike down the human without cause, we risk creating a martyr. The chamber rumbled with agreement. It was true. The servants were beaten down, but even the lowest shadow might rise if they saw injustice too clearly. Lady Serenia leaned forward, her eyes glinting like blades. Then let us not destroy them yet. Let us use them. If the human believes the shadow is more than what she is, then perhaps we can turn his weakness against him, draw him closer, make him trust us, and when he is bound by his own heart, we will crush them both. The council murmured approval. Vorax's fists tightened, but he bowed, knowing the decision had been made. The trap was set. Meanwhile, Elias remained unaware of the storm gathering around him. He continued to meet Leora in secret, sharing stories of Earth, of freedom, of choices she had never known. To Leora, each word was like a seed planted in dry soil, growing roots where hope had never existed. But beneath her hope ran fear. She felt the shadows watching, even when no one was there. One evening, Kale approached her in the servant quarters. His old eyes burned with warning. Leora, you must be careful. We're speaking of you in places no servant's name has ever been spoken. You're no longer invisible. You're a danger. Her voice shook. I never wanted this. I never wanted to be seen. Kale placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. Sometimes, child, we don't choose to be seen. Sometimes the light finds us, whether we are ready or not, and as Leora lay awake that night, staring at the cracks in the stone ceiling, she realized Kale was right. She was no longer just a servant. She was becoming something the rulers feared. And fear in the hearts of tyrants was always followed by violence. The following days brought a strange calm to the palace. No harsh punishments, no sudden threats. Instead, the rulers extended an unexpected invitation to Captain Elias Ward. He was asked to attend a private feast in his honor, a gathering meant to celebrate friendship between Earth and Xyrelis. But beneath the glitter of jewels and polished crystal tables, danger simmered like poison in a golden cup. Leora was ordered to serve at the feast. When she heard the command, dread sank heavy into her chest. She knew this was no ordinary gathering. The council did nothing without reason, and this sudden display of hospitality was a mask. Something was being tested, perhaps Elias's loyalty, perhaps her silence, or perhaps both. That night, the banquet hall glowed with golden light. Towers of fruit floated above the tables, shifting colors with every passing second. Streams of wine poured upward instead of downward, forming shining rivers across the air. Nobles laughed, their voices echoing like thunder, but their eyes were sharp, calculating. Elias entered, standing tall in his Earth uniform. He felt the weight of their stares pressing down on him, but he did not falter, nodded politely, his mind already suspicious of the sudden friendliness. When Leora stepped into the hall, carrying a tray of glowing crystal goblets, his heart lurched. She moved gracefully, her silver eyes lowered, but he noticed the way her hands trembled. He wanted to speak to her, but he forced himself to remain silent. Too many eyes were watching. Then the test revealed itself. Lady Saranya raised her voice above the feast, her tone smooth and dangerous. "Captain Ward," she said, smiling with venom hidden behind beauty, "we hear stories of Earth's values of freedom, of equality, of compassion. But tell us, do you truly believe such things apply? Even to shadows?" The hall fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned toward him. The blue fire at the center of the hall crackled, as though waiting for his answer. Ilias's jaw tightened. He understood the trap. If he spoke the truth, if he admitted that Leora and the servants deserved freedom, he would offend the council, perhaps even invite execution. But if he denied it, if he claimed that servants were meant to remain shadows, he would betray Leora, crushing the fragile bond they had built. Every second stretched like a blade. Leora's breath caught as she set the tray down, her heart pounding in her chest. She dared not look up, but every nerve in her body screamed for his answer. Finally, Elias spoke. His voice was calm but strong, steady as a mountain. "Yes. On Earth," he said, "we believe that no life is lesser. Whether human or Zarelian, noble or servant, every being deserves dignity. To me, shadows do not exist, only people." A ripple of gasps spread through the chamber. Some nobles sneered with outrage. Others narrowed their eyes, their silence more dangerous than fury. Lady Serenia's smile only widened. "How noble," she purred, though her eyes glittered with malice. Leora's heart swelled with pride and fear. Elias had spoken truth, but truth in Xyrelis was a dangerous weapon. The feast continued with forced laughter, but the tension never left the air. Behind their smiles, the nobles whispered of punishment, of control, of ways to break the human's will. That night, as Leora returned to the servant quarters, she realized what Ilias's words meant. He had chosen her, chosen to stand with her, even before the rulers of her world. And that meant the council would never let him go unchallenged. The test of loyalty was only the beginning. The storm was coming. The council's chamber was restless after the feast. What Elias had said, what he dared to speak aloud, was more than just words. To the rulers of Xyrelis, it was a threat. They thrived on order, on silence, on fear, and here was a human, standing boldly in their own hall, proclaiming that servants were not shadows, but people. The insult burned like fire in their veins. Vorak, shaking with rage, demanded swift punishment. "The human has betrayed his place. Strike him down, and let the servants see what becomes of those who dream above their station." But Lady Saranya, ever cunning, held her hand high to silence him. "No," she said smoothly, her voice curling through the chamber like smoke. "If we kill him now, he becomes a martyr. Instead, let us squeeze him slowly. We will show the servants that even their so-called defender can be broken." Her words dripped with poison, and the council agreed. Plans were set in motion, plans not to destroy Elias immediately, but to twist his bond with Leora until it shattered. But outside the council halls, something far more dangerous was stirring. In the servant quarters, whispers had spread like wildfire. Kale, the old servant, had repeated Ilias's words a dozen times to anyone who would listen. He said, "We are not shadows," Kale whispered fiercely, his eyes glowing with long-buried fire. "He called us people. Do you hear, people?" The servants listened, hearts pounding. For years they had lived in silence, too afraid to even imagine a different life. Now a human had spoken truth aloud in the very presence of the rulers. That truth echoed in their bones, shaking chains that had felt eternal. Leora saw it in their eyes. The spark she once feared had become a flame. When she passed other servants in the corridors, they looked at her differently now. Not as another shadow, but as someone who carried hope. And that terrified her as much as it warmed her heart. Late one night, Kale approached her in secret. His voice was urgent, his old hands trembling. "They're waiting for you, Leora. They believe you're the key, you and the human. We've shown them that chains can be broken." Leora shook her head, her voice tight with fear. "I am no leader, Kale. I'm just a servant. If they look to me, they will all be destroyed." Kale's eyes burned brighter. "That's what the rulers want you to believe, but I've lived long enough to know this. Tyrants fear those who don't even know their own strength. And Leora, they fear you." Her heart raced. She wanted to deny it, to hide from the weight being placed on her shoulders. But deep down, she knew Kale was right. The ruler's anger, the spy's watchful eyes, the council's threats, all of it meant she was no longer invisible. She was a symbol, whether she wanted to be or not. Meanwhile, Elias was equally restless. He paced his chamber, fists clenched, mind spinning with what he had seen at the feast. The nobles' fake smiles, their glittering eyes, it was clear they were plotting against him. But worse, he knew Leora was in danger because of him. He couldn't stand by any longer. If they were going to survive, if they were going to fight for freedom, they would need allies. And in the silent corners of the palace, allies were already waiting. Servants who had nothing left to lose, servants ready to rise. The seeds of uprising had been planted. All it would take was one spark to set the world of Xyrilus ablaze. The night was unusually quiet on Xyrilus. The twin moons hung low, casting long shadows across the palace walls. But beneath that stillness, something dangerous was growing. The whispers of servants had become louder, bolder, no longer hidden in hushed tones. In the kitchens, in the halls, in the mines, everywhere the servants toiled, the same question was asked. If the human dares to call us free, why do we still bow? Leora felt the weight of those whispers pressing on her shoulders. She hadn't asked to be a symbol, hadn't wanted her name carried on the breath of every servant. Yet now, wherever she went, eyes followed her. Some were filled with hope, others with fear, and some even with envy. She was no longer just another shadow. She was the flame everyone looked to in the darkness. Elias saw the same change. When he walked the palace halls, servants no longer avoided his gaze. Some met his eyes with trembling courage, nodding slightly as if to say, "We hear you." The bond between him and Leora had done more than defy rules. It had cracked open a door that had been locked for centuries, but the rulers were not blind. The council, furious at the growing restlessness, tightened its grip. Extra guards were posted in the servant quarters, curfews were enforced, whips cracked louder in the courtyards, as though fear could drown out hope. Vorak, the overseer, grew more ruthless by the day, dragging servants into the mines at the smallest hint of defiance. Yet the harder the rulers pushed, the stronger the fire grew. One night Elias slipped into the gardens, where he often met Leora. She was already there, standing under the glowing trees, her silver eyes heavy with worry. "They know," she whispered the moment she saw him. "The council watches us more closely than ever. Vorak's spies follow me everywhere. If we're caught, Elias, they won't just punish me. They'll make an example of me." Ilias's jaw tightened, but his voice was steady. "Then we won't let them. Can't keep hiding, Leora. They've already marked us as a threat. The only choice left is to prove them right." Her breath caught. "You mean rebellion?" He nodded. "Yes. Not just for us, but for all of them. For Kale. For every servant who has been forced into silence. They're already looking to you. The question is, will you let their hope die in the shadows, or will you lead them into the light?" Tears welled in her eyes. The thought of leading terrified her. She had spent her whole life obeying, surviving, never daring to lift her head. How could she now rise and defy the very order that had crushed generations? But when she looked into Ilias's eyes, she saw no doubt. She saw belief. And in his belief, she found her own strength. "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice trembling. "So am I," Elias answered softly. "But courage isn't the absence of fear, Leora. It's choosing to fight even when you're afraid." In that moment, under the twin moons of Xyrilus, Leora made her choice. She would no longer be a servant who bowed in silence. She would rise not only for herself, but for every shadow who had ever longed for freedom. What she didn't know was that the rulers were already preparing their move. The council had decided that the bond between human and servant had grown too strong to be ignored. And soon, their test would turn into a trap. The fire had been lit, and the flames were about to consume everything. The Council of Xyrilus wasted no time after the feast. Ilias's bold declaration had shaken them, and Leora's quiet defiance had become a thorn in their pride. Tyrants could tolerate whispers, but they could never allow those whispers to become a song. If they didn't crush this bond now, the entire system of power could collapse. Lady Serenia, sly and calculating, was the one who shaped the plan. She suggested a gesture of trust, an invitation for Elias to witness the sacred trial of shadows. A ritual the rulers claimed honored tradition. In reality, it was nothing more than a brutal display designed to remind the servants of their place. Every year, one servant was chosen at random and forced to endure a public test of obedience. If they failed, they were cast into the mines or executed before the crowd. "We will let the human watch," Serenia told the council, her eyes glittering with malice. "Let him see the shadow he loves brought low. His heart will break, and with it, his foolish rebellion." The council agreed. Vorak was given the honor of selecting the servant for the trial. Of course, his choice was obvious. He wanted to see Leora's spirit crushed. When the announcement came, Leora's blood turned cold. She was to be the shadow tested before the entire court of Zerulus. The punishment for failure was death. The punishment for defiance was worse. She would not only be destroyed, but made into an example. Her ashes scattered as a warning to others who dared to dream. Elias's fury boiled when he heard. He stormed into the council chamber, demanding her release. "You can't do this. She's done nothing but serve you faithfully." Lord Zyros's voice was calm, almost amused. "Then she has nothing to fear, human. If she is truly loyal, she will pass the trial. If she is not, then she is not worth saving." The rulers laughed at his anger. To them, his outrage only proved how deeply their trap was working. That night, Elias found Leora in the gardens. She stood by the violet sea, the twin moons casting silver light on her trembling figure. Her voice was barely a whisper when she spoke. "They want me to fail. They want me to kneel and break, so every servant sees hope die." "Then don't kneel," Elias said, his hand gripping hers tightly. "No matter what they demand, no matter what they threaten you, don't kneel. Not to them. Shh, not anymore." Her eyes filled with tears. "If I defy them, they'll kill me." His voice was fierce, steady as steel, and if you obey, you'll die inside. They want to use you to kill the hope of your people. Don't give them that victory. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The waves lapped softly against the shore. Finally, Leora nodded, her voice trembling but certain. "Then I will not kneel." What neither of them knew was that Kale and several other servants had overheard their vow. Word spread quickly through the quarters. By the time dawn approached, hundreds of servants whispered the same phrase in unison. "She will not kneel." The council had set its trap. But instead of fear, they had planted the seed of rebellion. And when Leora stepped into the trial, all of Zyrellus would be watching, not just to see if she survived, but to see if the shadow they despised would finally rise into the light. The great amphitheater of Zerulus had not been filled in decades. It was a place built for spectacle, its tiered stone seats curving high into the sky, large enough to hold thousands. On this night, every seat was taken. Nobles dressed in jeweled robes sat closest to the stage. Guards lined the edges, their weapons glowing with deadly light. Above them, servants huddled in the shadows, dragged from their quarters to watch the trial. Fear and anticipation swirled like a storm in the air. At the center of the arena stood Leora. Her plain gray robes fluttered in the night wind. Chains bound her wrists, though she stood tall, refusing to bow her head. The council watched from thrones raised above the crowd, their eyes sharp, waiting for her spirit to break. Elias sat under guard, forced into a seat among the nobles. His fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. Every instinct screamed at him to act, but he knew one reckless move could doom them both. Vorak strode into the arena, towering and cruel, his voice booming through the amphitheater. "Tonight we remind the shadows of their place. One of their own will prove her loyalty or be cast aside as worthless dust. Watch closely, for this is the fate of all who forget what they are." The crowd roared, though not all voices carried joy. Among the servants, murmurs rose. "She will not kneel." The words spread like fire through dry grass. Arak turned to Leora. "Kneel, shadow," he commanded. "Bow before your rulers, and you may yet live." The world seemed to hold its breath. Leora's heart pounded in her chest. She remembered the nights by the violet sea, Elias's words echoing in her mind. "Don't kneel. Not anymore." Her knees trembled, but she locked them in place. Slowly, she raised her head, her silver eyes blazing with defiance. "I will not kneel," she said, her voice steady. Gasps rippled through the amphitheater. Vorak's face twisted with rage. He stepped closer, his voice thundering louder. "Then you will die, Neil, or I will see you broken." Again her answer rang out, louder this time, carrying to every corner of the arena. "I will not kneel." The servants erupted in a roar of disbelief and awe. For the first time in centuries, one of their own had defied the rulers in public. The nobles hissed with fury, their jewels flashing as they leaned forward, hungry for her destruction. But Lady Serena's smile was sharp and cruel. To her, this was even better than obedience. Leora's defiance would make her a perfect lesson when crushed. She would shatter hope completely. Vorak raised his hand, signaling the guards. Spears of energy hummed to life, aimed at Leora's chest. Leah surged to his feet, shouting, "Stop! If you harm her, you'll answer to me." Oh, but guards forced him back, their weapons glowing at his throat. In that instant, something extraordinary happened. The servants in the highest seats, trembling with fear, began to chant. First one, then 10, then hundreds of voices rose together, echoing across the arena. "She will not kneel. She will not kneel." The chant shook the amphitheater. The rulers shouted for silence, but the voices only grew louder, defiance swelling like a tidal wave. Leora stood at the center, her chains glittering under moonlight, no longer just a servant, but a symbol. Vorak's rage burned hotter than the sun's, but even he felt it, the shift in power. The shadows were rising. And once a shadow rises, it can no longer be unseen. The amphitheater trembled with the voices of the servants. "She will not kneel." The chant rolled like thunder, shaking the very stones of the arena. Nobles shouted in anger, their jeweled robes flashing as they tried to silence the crowd. Guards pushed into the servant sections, striking with whips, but the voices did not stop. Fear had always kept them quiet. Now, hope gave them courage. Leora stood unbroken in the center, her chains clinking softly as she raised her chin higher. She had never felt power before, but tonight she felt it coursing through her veins. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer a shadow. She was the flame in the dark, and the servants were catching fire. Vorak roared above the chaos. Enough. His hand slashed through the air, signaling the guards. End her life, and let her ashes silence these fools. The guards aimed their glowing spears. Leas lunged forward in his seat, fury blazing in his eyes. He didn't think of his mission, of diplomacy, of survival. He thought only of her. The woman who had been treated as less than nothing, who had chosen to stand tall in chains. He would not let her die. "Stop!" Elias shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. He broke free from the guards holding him, his strength fueled by desperation. In one swift motion, he grabbed a fallen energy spear and pointed it toward Vorak. The amphitheater gasped in shock. The human had dared to raise a weapon in the sacred chamber of rulers. "Touch her," Elias growled, "and I swear you'll regret it." The council erupted in outrage. Lords rose from their crystal thrones, their voices booming with fury. Blasphemy, treason, kill them both. But something happened that they had not expected. The servants surged forward. They leaped from their seats, swarming past the guards, their voices still chanting. "She will not kneel. She will not kneel." For the first time in centuries, they were not cowering, they were rising. Leora's eyes widened as she saw them. Hundreds of servants pour into the arena, no longer afraid. She felt tears burn her cheeks. This was bigger than her, bigger than Elias, bigger than any one person. This was rebellion. Vorak, enraged beyond reason, charged into the arena himself. His towering frame loomed over Leora, his hand glowing with lethal energy. "Then you die a traitor," he bellowed. But before he could strike, Elias hurled the stolen spear. It blazed through the air, striking Vorak's hand and shattering the glow. The overseer roared in pain, clutching his burned flesh. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A servant had defied them, but now, a human had wounded one of their most feared masters. The amphitheater exploded into chaos. Servants battled guards with fists, stones, and stolen weapons. Nobles shrieked, retreating to the safety of their thrones. The council fire in the center of the chamber flared wildly as if the very world felt the shift of power. Through it all, Elias reached Leora, breaking her chains with the spear. She stumbled into his arms, trembling but unbroken. You see, Elias whispered fiercely, we're never a shadow. We're the light they couldn't hide. Her eyes glistened, filled with both fear and hope. Then let us burn together. And as the arena erupted into battle, the spark of uprising became a blaze that would change Xerilus forever. The amphitheater had become a battlefield. Sparks of energy crackled through the air as guards unleashed their glowing spears, but the servants surged forward like a tide. They had no weapons, no armor, only courage and rage, born from centuries of chains. Yet their numbers overwhelmed the guards, and for every servant who fell, 2 more rose to take their place. Nobles scrambled to safety, their jeweled robes tangling as they fled the chaos. Their voices, once sharp and commanding, shrieked with fear. The council shouted orders from their high thrones, but their words were drowned beneath the roar of rebellion. The order of Xerilus, the rule that had endured for generations, was unraveling before their eyes. Elias pulled Leora close, shielding her as sparks exploded around them. We need to get you out of here, he shouted over the noise. His grip was firm, but his eyes burned with determination. Leora shook her head. No, if I run, they'll crush the others. This fire isn't just mine. Elia sits theirs too. I can't abandon them. He stared at her, torn between fear and admiration. In the middle of chaos, she was no longer the trembling servant he had first met. She stood like a queen, her silver eyes shining with defiance. He realized then that her strength wasn't just in survival, it was in refusing to kneel, even when the world demanded it. Before he could answer, Vorak's roar split the air. The overseer, his burned hands still smoldering, stormed across the arena. His eyes blazed with fury, his towering frame unstoppable. You dare defy me, Shadow. You dare defy your masters. He swung a massive energy blade, its light searing the stone beneath his feet. Servants scattered in terror, but Elias stood his ground, shoving Leora behind him. You'll have to go through me first. The two clashed, sparks flying with every strike. Elias fought with desperation, using the stolen spear to block and counter. Vorak was stronger, faster, built for domination. Every blow rattled Elias's bones, but he refused to back down. This was no longer about survival. It was about proving that even a servant's life was worth defending. Leora watched, her heart twisting. She could not stand by while Elias fought alone. Grabbing a fallen guard's weapon, she leapt into the fray. The blade hummed in her hands, heavy but alive with energy. She swung with all her strength, striking Vorak across the chest. The blow didn't kill him, but it staggered him, forcing him back. For the first time, Vorak's eyes widened, not with anger, but with shock. A servant had struck him. A shadow had dared to fight. The servants erupted in cheers, their chant returning louder than ever. She will not kneel. She will not kneel. The council, realizing the battle was slipping from their control, signaled their guards to retreat. The amphitheater shook as the rulers fled into their hidden chambers, leaving Vorak howling in fury. Elias grabbed Leora's hand, pulling her through the chaos. This fight isn't over, we have to move now. Together, they raced through the burning corridors, pursued by the overseer's guards. Flames licked the walls as rebellion spread through the palace, servants rising in every corner. The world of shadows was collapsing, replaced by fire and freedom. And at the heart of it all, Leora ran with Elias, her chains broken, her spirit unbound. She was no longer a servant hiding in silence. She was the spark that had become a blaze. But even as they escaped into the night, Leora knew this was only the beginning. The rulers would not surrender easily. The true war for Xerilus was yet to come. The palace burned behind them, flames licking the sky like furious spirits set free. The once proud towers of crystal now cracked and shattered, their light no longer symbols of power, but of ruin. Servants poured into the courtyards, some fighting with stolen weapons, others simply running for freedom they had never tasted before. The air was thick with smoke, cries, and the thunder of rebellion. Leora stood at the center of it all, her chest rising and falling as though she had just awakened from a long dream. Round her servants looked not to the rulers, not even to Elias, but to her. Their eyes shone with something she had never seen directed at her self-trust. Kale, old and weary but unbroken, stepped forward. His voice, cracked with age, carried like a trumpet. "The shadow who would not kneel," he shouted. the shadow who rose when all others bowed. Tonight, she has shown us what we are. A roar erupted from the crowd. Leora, Leora, they cried. Her name rose like a song, echoing through the night. Elias stood beside her, pride blazing in his eyes. He leaned close, his voice steady, despite the chaos. Do you see, Leora? You were never just a servant. You are their queen, the queen of those who were shadows. Her breath caught. The word felt impossible. A queen, she had scrubbed floors, carried trays, endured silence and scorn. How could she be queen of anything? But when she looked at the faces around her, men, women, children, all trembling yet unbowed, she understood. A queen was not always born in jewels. Sometimes a queen rose from chains. I don't know if I can be what they need, she whispered. Elias touched her hand, his voice fierce with conviction. You already are. You gave them hope when they had none. That's what makes a true queen, not power, not wealth, but the courage to stand when no one else will. Tears blurred her vision. But she stood taller, her silver eyes gleaming through the smoke. Then I will stand. For them. For all of us. The servants cheered louder, their voices shaking the very ground. For the first time in generations, they did not chant obedience. They chanted freedom. But far above, in the darkened council chambers, the rulers watched the flames from hidden windows. Lady Serenia's smile was thin and cruel. So the shadow plays at being queen, she murmured. Let her rise. The higher she climbs, the further she will fall. And when she falls, so too will all who follow her. Vorak. His chest still scorched from battle, slammed his fist into the wall. Give me an army, and I'll crush them before dawn. But Lord Zyros shook his head, his ancient voice calm, not yet. Let them taste freedom. Let them believe in their false queen. When the time is right, we will strike hand. Their hope will shatter forever. The council agreed. In the shadows, they sharpened their weapons and their plans. The rebellion had begun, but the war was far from won. And so, as dawn broke over Zerlus, painting the sky with fire and ash, Leora stood with Elias among her people. She was no longer a servant. She was no longer a shadow. She was their queen. But every queen has enemies. And hers were already preparing to strike. The dawn on Zerlus was unlike any other. Smoke curled into the sky, mixing with the lavender light of the twin suns rising above the horizon. The palace, once a symbol of absolute power, now smoldered as a scar across the golden desert. The rebellion had begun, but with dawn came silence, a tense, heavy silence that settled over the survivors. Leora stood at the heart of the gathered servants. Her plain gray robes were torn, her silver skin streaked with ash, but her posture was unyielding. Hundreds surrounded her, their eyes wide, waiting, searching. For the first time in her life, they did not see her as one of them. They saw her as something greater, a queen. Elias stood close by, watching the weight settle on her shoulders. He could see it in her trembling hands, in the way her breath came heavy, though she forced her face to remain steady. She had not asked for this role, yet destiny had placed it upon her, and there was no turning away. Kale stepped forward, bowing his head, though his voice rang strong. What are your orders, Queen of the Shadows? The words pierced Leora's heart. Queen of the Shadows. The title felt heavy, far heavier than chains. Her first instinct was to deny it, to cry out that she was no queen, no leader, only a servant who had dared to stand once. But when she looked into the faces around her, faces scarred by suffering, yet now lit with fragile hope, she knew denial would crush them all. Slowly, she raised her voice. I am no queen by birth. I have no jewels, no throne. But if you will have me, then I will stand for you. I will fight for you. I will never kneel, not to them, not to anyone. The servants erupted in cheers, their voices shaking the scorched earth. For the first time in living memory, they had someone to rally behind. Elias placed a steady hand on her shoulder, whispering so only she could hear. You did it. You gave them what they needed. But Leora, a crown is more than words. Hey, they will look to you not just for hope, but for answers, for protection. Her throat tightened. And what if I fail them? And you'll fail standing, he said firmly. But I don't believe you will. You were never meant to stay in chains. You were meant for this. Even as his words strengthened her, a shadow of dread crept through her heart. The rebellion was raw, unshaped, fragile. The nobles were wounded but not destroyed. The council still held armies, weapons, and centuries of control. And already she knew they were plotting their counterstrike. She lifted her gaze toward the horizon where the palace ruins still smoldered. "They will come for us," she said. "They will not let this stand." Elias nodded. "Then we'll be ready." Together, the crowd quieted as she raised her hands. "We have risen once," she told them, "but this is only the beginning. We wish to be free. We must fight not only with courage, but with unity. We are no longer shadows. We are people. This world will remember our name." The cheer that followed shook the air like thunder. But high above, in the secret halls of the council, Lady Serenia watched through a crystal mirror. Her smile was sharp, her voice dripping with venom. "So, the servant wears a crown? Good. Let her taste the sweetness of power. It will make her fall all the more bitter when we tear it away." The game had changed. Leora was no longer fighting for herself. She was fighting for the people, for a future.
No.
And though her crown was invisible, its weight pressed heavily upon her soul. The rebellion had won its first breath of freedom, but freedom was fragile on Zerulus. The palace lay scarred, servants walked taller, and hope flickered like a newborn flame, but far beyond the smoldering walls. The rulers were not idle. They were wounded, humiliated, but not defeated. And tyrants, when wounded, struck back harder than ever before. Lady Serenia stood at the head of the council, her jeweled robes untouched by ash. Around her, the nobles argued, their voices sharp with panic. "The servants rise in every quarter," one cried. "They refuse to work the mines," shouted another. "Our armies are stretched too thin. We cannot guard every city." Serenia silenced them with a single gesture. "Panic is for shadows," she said coldly. "We are rulers, and rulers do not panic. We strike." Her plan was merciless. Armies would march into the villages where servants had begun to gather. Rebellion would be crushed with fire. Children taken as hostages, families shattered until the will to fight turned to ashes. And at the center of her plot was Leora. "Cut off the head," Serenia whispered, "and the body dies. Break the Shadow Queen, and her people will crumble." While the rulers schemed, Laius worked to prepare the servants for what was coming. In a hidden cave system near the Violet Sea, he trained them with weapons stolen from guards, teaching them to fight not with fear, but with strategy. He showed them how to form lines, how to defend, and how to strike together. What once had been a crowd of beaten souls was slowly becoming an army. But training alone could not erase centuries of weakness. Elias knew it, and so did Leora. One night she walked among the people, listening to their voices. Some were strong, filled with fire. Others whispered doubts. How can we fight them? They have armies, weapons, and power beyond imagining. We are only shadows with stones in our hands. Her heart ached at their words. She had once believed the same. But now she stood before them, raising her voice above the doubts. You think you are weak because they told you so? But look at what we have already done. They called us shadows, yet we burned their palace. They said we would kneel, yet we stood tall. Do you not see? Their power is not endless. Their fear of us proves it. Her words carried through the cave, and slowly the murmurs turned to cheers. Hope was fragile, but it was still alive. When the cheers faded, she pulled Elias aside. Her eyes were troubled. Even with training, we cannot win if we face them head-on. Their armies are too strong. Elias nodded grimly. Then we won't fight them head-on. We'll use the land, the shadows, the night itself. Guerrilla strikes, sabotage, rebellion in every corner. If they want to fight shadows, we'll show them how dangerous shadows can be. Leora breathed deeply. She had never imagined herself as a queen, much less the leader of an army. Yet here she was, carrying the weight of hundreds, standing beside a human who believed in her more than she believed in herself. But across the land, armies were already on the move. Fires burned in villages, and smoke choked the horizon. The storm was coming fast, and it would not be satisfied with crushing rebellion. It wanted to erase hope itself. Leora tightened her fists. Then let the storm come. We will not kneel not to them, not ever again. And in the shadows the rulers smiled. for they knew the storm they were sending would test her crown, her courage, and her very soul. The storm the council promised soon arrived, not as rain or wind, but as fire and steel. Armies marched across Xyrelis, their glowing spears slicing the night, their banners of dominance unfurled. Villages where servants had whispered rebellion were turned into ashes. Children were dragged from their families, parents beaten in the streets, and entire communities crushed under the iron heel of the ruler's wrath. Word of the destruction spread quickly, carried by fleeing survivors who stumbled into the caves where Leora and her people gathered. Their stories filled the rebels with both fury and fear. A woman sobbed as she described her son taken by soldiers. An old man lifted trembling hands, scarred by flames, whispering that his village no longer existed. These were not just attacks, they were warnings. The council meant to starve hope at its root. Leora stood before the survivors, her chest heavy with grief. She wanted to weep with them, to crumble under the weight of so much suffering. But hundreds of eyes turned to her, searching for strength. A queen could not collapse, even if her heart was breaking. She clenched her fists and raised her voice. They think they can break us with fire, but we are the fire. They may burn our homes, but they cannot burn our spirit. For every village they destroy, 10 more will rise. For every child they take, 10 more will fight to bring them back. We will not bow. We will not kneel. Her words lit the crowd like sparks to dry grass. The servants, now rebels, roared with defiance, their voices echoing through the caves. But Elias, standing at her side, saw the shadow in her eyes. After the crowd dispersed, he pulled her aside. "You're strong for them," he said quietly. "But I know what this is doing to you." Her shoulders shook. "I see their faces, Elias. I hear their cries. How can I call myself their queen when I cannot protect them all?" He cupped her face gently, his gaze steady. "Can't protect everyone, Leora. No leader can. But you can give them something greater belief. That's why they follow you. That's why I follow you." Tears slid down her cheeks, but she nodded, clinging to his words. She had never wanted a crown, but now she bore one forged in fire and blood. The rebellion adapted quickly under Elias's guidance. They became shadows that struck in silence. They sabotaged supply lines, cut off communications, and ambushed patrols in the forests and deserts. Servants who had once bent under the weight of chains now became fighters, hunters, ghosts of vengeance. Each small victory stoked the fire of resistance, and the rulers began to feel the sting of losing control. But the council was not idle. From the palace ruins, Lady Serenia watched reports flood in of rebel strikes. Her lips curved into a cold smile. "Let them play at war," she murmured. "Every spark they light makes the blaze easier to see. And when we strike with the full force of our armies, there will be nowhere left for shadows to hide." Her eyes gleamed as she revealed her trump-card new weapons forged in secret, powered by ancient crystals buried deep within Xyrelis' core. Weapons strong enough to scorch entire regions in a single strike. The council would not merely crush the rebellion. They intended to erase it, wipe out every servant who dared to rise. And as the armies prepared to unleash this terror, Leora stood on a cliff above the violet sea, her silver eyes fixed on the horizon. She knew the cost of failure. If they lost now, it would not just mean defeat. It would mean extinction. Deep within the caves by the violet sea, the rebellion had grown from whispers into an army. Fires burned in makeshift hearths, casting light on faces hardened by struggle. Weapons scavenged from fallen guards lined the walls. Energy spears, blades, and crude clubs, fashioned from stone and steel. Children carried water, elders tended wounds, and everywhere voices hummed with determination. At the center of it all stood Leora. She no longer wore the gray rags of servitude. Rebels had stitched her a cloak from scavenged fabric, dark but trimmed with silver threads pulled from abandoned noble robes. It was not a crown, but when she walked through the camp, her people bowed not out of fear, but respect. Queen of the Shadows. The name was now spoken with pride, not mockery. Yet even as her people rallied, Leora felt the crushing weight of their trust. She paced the cave at night, her thoughts heavy. Every choice she made determined whether hundreds lived or died. She was no longer invisible. She was the heart of the rebellion. And hearts, she knew, could be broken. Elias watched her with quiet care. One evening, as the rebels sharpened their blades, he approached her by the fire. "You're carrying too much alone," he said softly. Her eyes flicked to him, tired but fierce. "They look to me, Elias. They believe in me. If I falter, the fire dies." He shook his head. "No, you're wrong. The fire isn't just you, it's all of them. You lit the spark, yes, but look at them now. They fight not because of who you are, but because of who they are finally allowed to be." His words struck deep, easing some of the weight on her chest. She realized he was right. The rebellion wasn't hers alone. It belonged to everyone who refused to kneel. That night, she stood before the rebels gathered in the cavern. Her voice carried strongly, echoing against the stone walls. "We are hunted. They burn our homes, steal our children, and call us shadows. But hear me now, we are not shadows. We are the light they fear. We will strike not as slaves, but as warriors. And when they come with their armies, we will not scatter, will not break, will rise." The cave thundered with cheers. Fists slammed against stone, weapons raised high. The sound shook the earth, louder than any chant ever heard in Xyrelis. But even as hope roared, danger grew near. Scouts rushed into the cavern, breathless with urgency. "The Council's armies march this way," one shouted. "They carry weapons we've never seen, crystals that burn hotter than suns. They mean to end us all." The rebels fell silent, fear rippling through the crowd. Leora's heart pounded. She had expected retaliation, but not this inhalation. Elias stepped forward, his voice steady as steel. "Then we don't wait for them to strike. We move first. We strike their weapon before they strike us." All eyes turned to Leora. This was the moment. If she commanded it, they would follow her into the jaws of death. If she faltered, hope would shatter. Her silver eyes blazed in the firelight. "Then we strike," she declared. "We will not wait to die in chains. We'll fight for freedom, even if it costs us everything." The cave erupted once more, voices rising like a storm. The rebellion was ready. But in the shadows, Lady Saranya watched through her crystal mirrors. Her smile was cruel, her whisper soft and venomous. "Yes, Alatal, little queen, lead your people into the fire. For when the end comes, it will be you who brings them to ruin." The heart of the rebellion beat strong, but the heart was also the target. The morning the armies came, the sky over Xyrelis was heavy and gray. Dust rose from the ground like a warning. The council's soldiers moved in straight lines, their faces hard and cold. Behind them, wagons carried the new crystal weapons bright, humming machines that smelled of power and death. Everyone knew this fight would decide the future of the planet. Inside the cavern, the rebels were ready. Men and women stood shoulder to shoulder, children and elders. Those who could not fight were moved to safer hiding places. Leora walked among her people. She spoke to each one with calm, clear words. "Today we fight for our homes," she said. "We fight for our children, our mothers, and our fathers. We fight because we will not kneel. Remember who you are." Elias checked the weapons and gave final orders to the fighters he had trained. He moved quietly, but his eyes met Leora's more than once. In each glance, they shared a promise. They would face this together. The rebels moved at dusk. They climbed the cliffs and crept through the dark. They were small shadows against a huge world, but they had a plan. Elias led a small strike team toward the crystal wagons. Others moved to cut off the guards. Leora took the center with the fighters who would set the signal that would start the attack. When the signal went up, a single flare of blue fire, the sky seemed to split. Chaos exploded across the field. The crystal weapons fired, screaming with heat and light, but the rebels were not afraid. They moved fast and quietly. They ducked behind dunes, through stones, and closed in on soldiers in short, fierce fights. Elias and his team reached the wagons. Guards fought hard, but the rebels were clever. They used ropes to topple the wagons. They cut the crystal conduits that fed the weapons. Sparks flew. One machine fell and burst into a shower of light. Elias smashed another crystal with a heavy hammer until it cracked. He worked like a man with no fear left, only duty. Meanwhile, Leora and her fighters had reached the front lines. She led them with a voice that held fire. "For freedom," she cried. and the rebels answered with a roar that shook the ground. They pushed forward together. The nobles' soldiers tried to hold them back, but they were not used to being fought like this. These were not slaves anymore. They were people with courage. At the heart of the battle, Leora saw Lady Serenia standing on a rise. The ruler wore new armor and a cruel smile. Around her, the remaining nobles shouted commands. Leora stepped forward, and Serenia called out, "Child, you could have stayed a servant. You could have been safe. Why do you force this?" "Because I will not kneel," Leora answered. Her voice carried over the clash of battle. "Because we are people." Serena laughed and raised a staff of crystal to strike. Leora lunged and met in a clash that felt like thunder. Guards tried to pull the nobles away, but Leora fought with every step she had learned from the rebels. She remembered the kitchens, the nights by the violet sea, the faces of those who believed in her. Those memories gave her strength. Elias fought through the guards to reach her, struck at Vorak, who attacked with a rage that had become fear. The two men battled, then Vorak fell. Elias stood, breathing hard, his eyes finding Leora. For a moment, the world was only the two of them. Serenia, wounded and humiliated, tried to flee. But the people of Zerulus once silent had moved like a tide and blocked her path. They took her prisoner. The crystal staff was broken, and the machines were crushed. The army of the nobles lost the will to fight, and many surrendered. After the dust settled, silence came down like a blanket. People stepped out from hiding. They looked at the ruins of the palace, at the broken crystal, and then at each other. No one cheered right away. Instead, many cried. They cried for what was lost and for what they had gained. Leora stood on a low mound with Elias by her side. Her hands were cut and her robes were torn, but her eyes were steady. People gathered around and laid weapons at her feet. "You did it," Kale said, his voice soft. "You led us." She shook her head slowly. "We did it. All of us." The council was dismantled. Lady Serenia and the nobles were put on trial. The people demanded fair laws. No one would be a servant again by birth. The mines were closed, and the stolen children were returned. New leaders were chosen by the people, not born into power. Elias chose to stay for a time. He helped build schools and taught about Earth's ways about fairness, speech, and rights. Leora accepted the role of leader, but she refused the old trappings of power. She lived among her people, walking the markets and teaching children by the violet sea. She wore no crown because she wanted no throne that separated her from those she served. Years later, travelers would tell the tale of the servant who became queen and then chose to lead as one of the people. They told how a human from another world crossed the stars and found a love that changed a planet. They spoke of fire, of courage, and of the day the shadows became light. And when people on Zerulus looked up at the twin moons, they no longer saw only cruel rulers. They saw change, and they whispered one phrase that had begun it all: "She will not kneel."